Hi, I'm Hugo Fonseca and welcome to the Connected Podcast. Today we have Pedro Siza Vieira, the Minister of State for the Economy and the Digital Transition, who will be answering some of our questions about the Portuguese European Union Presidency.
In 2020, the German government put the focus of its presidency on overcoming the COVID-19 pandemic, while also seeking answers to the challenges of the future that needed to be addressed, which thus expressed its goal of making Europe stronger, more equitable, and more sustainable. Some of its main decisions were to promote a more coordinated economic and social recovery, to expand the European Union's digital sovereignty, and to strengthen the social dimension and social cohesion. There was also the Next Generation European Union Fund, which consisted in a recovery package for the member states hit by the COVID-19 pandemic. However, despite Germany's valuable efforts, some of these goals were left to be concluded, which thus led Portugal to assume its presidency as a time to act.
So, starting off with the first question. As you said in Economia Viva, the motto of the Portuguese presidency was a time to act. With our term coming to an end, what is the balance that you make of our contribution? Were we able to act on our intentions?
Yes, good afternoon to you all. The Portuguese presidency indeed came at very challenging times. And when we decided that our motto would be a time to act, it was because we were following on the German presidency. During the German presidency, a lot of decisions were taken in respect of how best to respond to the economic and social crisis created by the COVID-19 pandemic, namely the the intention of launching the Next Generation EU program to support investment throughout the European Union as a way to provide an economic stimulus in the immediate following years, but also as laying down the foundations for a more digitally inclusive and climate-friendly economy in our union. So we decided that after these basic agreements had been concluded during the German presidency, we should follow up with the clear intention of making sure that we created the groundworks to put these things into motion. Therefore, we focused on the completion of that nitty-gritty process, which is difficult, sometimes takes a lot of time, but it's critical to being able to deploy these suggestions, such as making sure that we agree within the European Union Council and also at the Parliament the regulations which were required to implement the national recovery and resilience plans, which all member states have to provide in order to make sure that they can access the funds for Next Generation EU. We also undertaken a very significant and demanding agenda, which I'm happy to say that we were able to conclude very quickly. To be honest, when I now look at what we have achieved in this past 6 months, I must tell you that we went significantly far of what we could expect. I'll give you a couple of examples. We completed and agreed the Oporto Social Summit. This was very important because we identified as one of the critical topics in the agenda of change that we have for the European Union, the way to bring to the fore all the citizens of the European Union. As you know, when we're talking about digital transition, we're talking about new jobs being created, but at the same time, existing jobs being impacted in a way which requires new skills for workers, or may even put some jobs to an end. When we're talking about climate change, we certainly know that some jobs, some activities will also be lost. The most significant example is, for instance, workers which are working in the electricity power plants which are fired by coal, which will be shut down in the European Union in the coming years, all the workers in those areas will be affected. So we wanted to make sure that as we progress into this double transition, we make sure that the European Union is able to support that adverse impact which may take place in the jobs market and at the social sphere. So the Porto Social Summit was very significant in that for the first time we had all the social partners, business, trade associations, unions and governments coming around a package to support this social impact. I would also name another topic which is very significant, the approval of the first climate law for the European Union. The European Union has committed itself to becoming a carbon neutral continent by 2050, and we approved a climate law which sets out the groundwork for this. We approved all the instruments for the budget for the next period for the structural funds of the European Union. We completed a process which was blocked for 5 years, which was the country-by-country reporting, which we require now under the directive which was passed, that multinational companies operating in the European Union of a very large scale have an obligation to report where they make their profits and where they pay their taxes and what amounts we do. We completed the first summit of leaders of the European Union and India, which is a very significant partner which we believe needs to become more involved in Europe. And finally, we made an agreement on the maintenance of expansionary budget policies for not only 2021, but also 2022, and also started the discussion about what the budgetary rules should be for the euro area after 2023. So as you see, these are just examples of very significant milestones during our presidency where actually action was undertaken and was successfully completed.
Thank you so much. So moving on to the next question. Portugal presided to the Council of the European Union in a time of challenges and change. Living in these times, what would you say were the most challenging situations of our presidency? Is there something that can be systematically changed so that in the future those situations could go more smoothly?
Well, you're right. This was very challenging times, and I would say that the first challenge was to preside to the Council of the European Union, which requires sitting with governments from 27 different states, going to technical committees which must be chaired to advance files, liaising with both the European Parliament and the Commission, and doing so at a time when we had restrictions on travel, when we had to undertake most of our discussions through these electronic means. It doesn't help. But so this was the first challenge. I would say that another very significant challenge was that we had to make sure that we could recover some basic aspects of the European Union, such as the freedom of movement of people across the borders, which is a basic tenet of our internal market. Because of COVID, different countries were imposing different restrictions on the crossing of borders within the European Union. Some countries had different criteria to assess whether or not it was safe to travel to a certain country or another. The different requirements were established. Quarantines were in place by some countries, but not others, in respect of travelers coming from the same region. This was exactly the opposite of what the single market requires, which is freedom of movement of people. So we decided that we should address this topic which is why we worked with the Commission to have a proposal for what we call the COVID-19 travel certificate. It is a certificate which enables European citizens to freely cross borders, provided that they have a certificate which certifies that they have been vaccinated or that they have been tested with a negative result, or otherwise that they are immune because they have gotten COVID 6 months before. So we must understand that these legislative processes in the European Union usually take a lot of time. 18 months, 2 years, this can happen, or 5 years, such as the country-by-country reporting directive. And we pass this through Commission, Council, and the Parliament in less than 3 months. So that from the 1st of July, all European citizens can cross borders with a certificate in a digital or paper form. I think this was a great achievement to overcome a very significant challenge that we faced. I would also say that we have reviewed the European industrial strategy. One of the topics that we have identified during the pandemic is that whilst the European Union is a place of great well-being of populations, we are extremely dependent on certain critical raw materials or components, without which we cannot provide the same level of comfort or the ability to work for our firms. We all are remembered how a year ago there were no masks or other individual protective equipment against COVID-19 because the production in China had been suspended and we didn't face the resources to meet them in the European Union. We also identified that, for instance, now we don't have semiconductors, microchips in Europe to supply our factories, so that a number of factories have to be shut down because they lack these critical components. So we realized that we must build a European Union which is more resilient, which is able to withstand any crisis which can be caused today by a pandemic, tomorrow by a terrorist attack in a certain harbor, or some shipwreck in the Suez Canal. Now, this required that we map all these critical raw materials and components and try to identify strategies to have more redundancy in the systems that we have in place, and these global value chains, which may be very efficient but are not sufficiently solid to withstand any major crisis. So this was another topic where we made progress, and I think is important for our collective well-being. And finally, if I may say so, Hugo, one of the issues that we also decided and implemented during this past year is the idea that the European Union is going to issue debt issued by the European Union, guaranteed by governments, which will be long-term debt on 30 years. This is a very significant statement by the European Union. It means to investors, we are here to stay. 20 years from now, 30 years from now, we will still be here to honor your debt. And at the same time, what we are saying is that in order to pay this debt, we must raise resources to fund this, which is why we need to make progress on identifying the resources which the European Union will access to pay this debt. For instance, a tax on digital companies, multinational digital companies, or a tax on plastics, or also a carbon border tax. So as you see, significant challenges were faced, they were overcome, and I think that some of these acquisitions will stay for a long term.
Thank you so much. What do you believe can be the most relevant steps or challenges for the next country that will be assuming the presidency of the Council of the European Union, Slovenia?
Well, as you know, each presidency has a certain agenda, and what we do is we chair a meeting of representatives of member states, which sits in what we call the Council of the European Union, which is one of the legislative bodies of the Union. In order to have legislation, whether a regulation or a directive approved, we have to have agreement within the Council and then approval by the Parliament. And normally these legislative processes take a long time. So we can complete certain processes which come from before, or we can start others, or we can just help them progress between presidencies. I've explained it to you that because of these very challenging times, we could expedite a number of decisions which were taken in the shortest period of time in memory. But I think that otherwise we will pass on to the Slovenian presidency very significant topics. Let me talk about what is going on the digital sphere. The digital transition is one of the most significant changes in the world and society and economy. We need to make sure that not only our citizens are well equipped with skills to operate in a digital sphere, that our companies are well positioned to take full advantage of the digital technologies, and that our governments also make use of digital technologies to be more effective, more efficient, and also more transparent in the way how they operate or liaise with citizens and companies. And in order to achieve this, many things have to be done. The Next Generation EU program will be financing very significant investments across the European Union to achieve this. But also we must make sure that we have a legal framework which is appropriate for an economy which is no longer operating only on the physical world, but is more and more operating on the digital world. So there are a number of very significant legislation which is now progressing through the Council, which needs to be continued by the Slovenian presidency. What we call the Digital Services Package is one of such example. The Commission proposed in December last year the Digital Services Act and the Digital Services, the Digital Markets Act, and also the Data Governance Act. These three acts, which will be regulations of the Union, and therefore directly applicable to our countries, are very critical to make sure that, for instance, our companies, particularly SMEs, have access to marketplaces and platforms in a manner which is non-discriminatory. We must make sure that our citizens can develop trust in the business that is undertaking online. We must make sure that data, which is becoming a very critical component of how we make decisions and operate and extract value from the way economies work, is appropriately governed. I am a great enthusiast of these changes. I think that we need to make sure that our legal framework is appropriate for a digital economy. And I think that Europe has the ability to set up standards which can become global. A very fine example is the General Regulation on Data Protection. It is a regulation of the European Union, which came into force a few years from now. But because of the importance of the European Union, it is being followed by companies elsewhere in the world which want to do business in Europe. I do believe that this digital services package that we are implementing is going also to become a global standard. And do you really need that standard? I talk very much about the digital economy as by an analogy. Just imagine that at the beginning of the 20th century, we have built a very significant and dense highway network, highways to everywhere, and that we have given each citizen of the world a car to drive through that network. But we didn't have the road laws drafted. We are now drafting the road laws. And of course, this will impact the way people do business, but it's the best way to make sure that the traffic continues to flow in a seamless manner. Now, this digital package, services package, is going to have to be continued by the Slovenian presidency. And I think that's a very significant task that they will have to continue. We're passing the torch and hope that they can progress it until the French presidency, which will come to work in the first half of 2022.
So the final question is, can we expect an official European digital currency?
That is something that we have not discussed. We know that's in the agenda. It is the ability of central banks to issue digital currency and making sure that they better control the monetary flows which are in place. But that is not something that is at the stage where we are discussing in the Council the actual proposals in that respect.
All right, thank you so much, Mr. Vieira. That was all of the questions. I want to thank you so much. It was a true pleasure to have you here. That's it from the episode. Thank you so much for watching, and stay connected.
Thank you for having me, and good afternoon to you all. It was a pleasure.